The wind off the lake carried the bite of late autumn, sharp enough to sting Helen's cheeks as she knelt at the water's edge. 1 year. 365 days since the call. Since the police at her door. Since the closed casket service she still couldn't remember without tasting metal. She pressed Nathan's wedding band between her fingers, the gold warmed by her palm. The inscription inside, "Forever isn't long enough," blurred as tears welled. She had come to this secluded cove every month, but today, the anniversary, felt final. Time to let the ring sink, let the water take the last piece of him she still carried. "I thought I could do this," she whispered to the gray ripples. "Say goodbye, but it still hurts like the first day." Her voice cracked. She drew her arm back. Gravel crunched behind her. Violent, sudden, like gunfire in the silence. Helen's breath caught. She spun, the ring slipping from her fingers, pinging against a rock before vanishing into the mud. A black sedan sat crooked on the dirt path, driver's door hanging open. A man stepped out, the world tilted, broad shoulders in a dark wool coat, the same uneven stride, left leg favoring old soccer injury. The way he pushed wind-blown hair from his forehead. Exactly the way he used to after showering, towel around his waist, grinning at her in the mirror. Nathan. But Nathan was ash in an urn on her dresser. He looked thinner, cheekbones sharper, eyes shadowed with exhaustion. A thin scar cut through his left eyebrow new. He stared at her like she was a stranger who'd stolen his breath. Helen's knees buckled. She caught herself on the boulder where he'd once carved their initials. The bark of it scraped her palms, grounding her in impossible reality. Nathan. The name left her throat raw. He took one hesitant step, then another, boots sinking into the damp earth. His gaze traveled over her face, searching, confused. When he spoke, his voice was rougher than she remembered, like he hadn't used it in months. I know this is going to sound insane." He stopped a few feet away, hands open at his sides. "I was driving past and something pulled me here, like a hook in my chest." His eyes, those storm-gray eyes she'd kissed 1,000 times, flickered with pain. "I don't know why I'm crying. I don't even know who you are." Helen's heart fractured all over again. "But," he whispered, voice breaking, "when I saw you standing there, it felt like coming home." The lake wind howled between them, carrying dead leaves across the space neither dared to cross. The wind shoved at them both, pushing Helen's hair across her mouth, pressing Nathan's coat against his frame like it wanted to keep him from her. She couldn't move. Her lungs had forgotten how. Nathan wiped at his eyes with the heel of his hand, confused by his own tears. "I'm sorry. I don't know why I—" He looked at the lake, then back at her, voice fraying. "You know my name." It wasn't a question. Helen's throat worked soundlessly. Finally the word scraped out. "You're dead." His shoulders jerked as if she'd struck him. I have ID. Nathan Keller. Date of birth, March 14th. I woke up in a hospital in Portland 6 months ago. They said I'd been in a coma after a car accident. That's all I—" He stopped, hearing how insane it sounded even to himself. She took one stumbling step forward. The gravel shifted under her boot and she almost fell. Nathan's hand shot out, catching her elbow. The moment his fingers closed around her coat sleeve, they both froze. Warm, real, alive. Helen's breath shuddered out of her in a broken sob. She stared at his hand on her arm like it might vanish. Slowly, terrified, she lifted her other hand and laid it over his knuckles. The small scar across his second finger, the one he got slicing lemons for her birthday margaritas, was still there. He didn't pull away, but his brow creased with something close to fear. "You're shaking." "So are you," she whispered. Their eyes locked. For one heartbeat the world narrowed to gray irises she used to wake up to every morning, to the faint freckle just beneath his left eye that she'd kissed 1,000 times. His pupils flared. He felt it too, some ancient recognition his mind refused to name. He let go first, fingers uncurling like it burned. Look, I don't understand what's happening, but I can't just leave you here crying. He swallowed hard. My car's right there. At least let me drive you home. Or somewhere. Please. Home. The words sliced her open. She laughed. A raw, wounded sound. You don't even know where home is. No, he said quietly, something aching behind the admission. But I think you do. Helen looked past him to the sedan. Rental plates, mud-spattered, a parking ticket already fluttering under the wiper. 6 months, he'd said. 6 months of life she hadn't been part of while she'd been sleeping with his empty pillow. She found the ring in the mud with the toe of her boot, bent, closed trembling fingers around it. When she straightened, Nathan was watching her with unbearable gentleness. I'll go with you, she heard herself say. But not home. Not yet. He nodded once, relief and dread mingling on his face. He opened the passenger door for her, the same way he always had, left hand on the frame, right hand hovering protectively near her head so she wouldn't bump it. Muscle memory. His body remembered what his mind had buried. Helen slid into the seat. The car smelled like cold coffee and unfamiliar cologne. But beneath it, faint, the trace of cedar and bergamot that used to cling to his skin after he shaved. Nathan hesitated behind the wheel. Where to? She closed her fist around the ring until the edge cut her palm. Somewhere we can talk, she said, voice barely audible. Somewhere I can tell you who you were to me. Before you forgot. He started the engine. As they pulled away from the lake, Helen watched the water shrink in the side mirror, watched the place she'd come to bury him disappear. In the silence between them something pulsed, alive and wounded, waiting to be named. Then Nathan spoke, soft, almost to himself. I don't know you, he murmured, eyes fixed on the road. But I missed you. I don't know how that's possible. But I did. Helen turned her face to the window so he wouldn't see her fall apart all over again. The car rolled to a stop in front of the old craftsman house. Its porch light flickering like it, too, was unsure whether to welcome him. Helen's fingers fumbled with the seat belt twice before it released. Nathan killed the engine but didn't move to get out. In the sudden quiet, the rain started soft, reluctant drops against the windshield. Helen's pulse hammered in her ears. This is it, she said, barely a breath. Our house. He stared at the porch swing they used to share on summer nights. The chipped blue paint on the railing he'd promised to fix every spring and never did. His throat worked. It feels familiar, like déjà vu that hurts. She pushed the door open before she could lose her nerve. Cold rain kissed her face as she stepped onto the gravel. Nathan followed, coat collar turned up, hands shoved deep in pockets. They climbed the 3 steps side by side, close enough that her sleeve brushed his arm. Neither pulled away. Inside smelled of cedar and the vanilla candle she hadn't lit since the funeral. She flicked on one lamp. Golden light spilled across the living room, catching dust motes that had settled in his absence. Nathan stopped just past the threshold, eyes sweeping the space like he was walking into a dream he couldn't trust. Helen went straight to the bookshelf, fingers trembling as she pulled down the thick white album. Their wedding album. She hugged it to her chest for a moment, then set it on the coffee table between them like an offering. Sit, she whispered. He lowered himself slowly to the couch, the same spot he always claimed, left cushion, legs stretched long. His body remembered even if his mind refused. Helen sat opposite, knees almost touching his, album open on her lap. She turned the first page. There they were, younger, laughing, foreheads pressed together under strings of cafe lights. Nathan's breath hitched. He leaned forward without thinking, elbows on knees. The scent of her, rain and something faintly floral, drifted across the small space and his chest tightened. That's really me, he said, voice rough. That's really us. She turned another page. Him lifting her over a puddle in her wedding dress, her arms flung around his neck. Another, him feeding her cake, white frosting on the tip of her nose. His thumb had wiped it away right before he kissed her. Nathan's hand lifted, hovered over the photo, then dropped. I don't remember taking these, but I can feel them, like an echo. Helen's eyes burned. She flipped to the back, honeymoon shots on a windswept beach. Nathan asleep on a striped towel, her fingers in his hair, sunlight striping his bare back. She'd captioned it, I could watch you breathe forever. He stared at that one longest. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked. I look happy, like I belong to someone. You belong to me, she said, the words scraping out raw. You still do. His gaze snapped to hers. Something fierce and frightened flared behind his eyes. He reached out, slow, hesitant, and brushed a tear from her cheek with the pad of his thumb. The touch lingered. His skin was warm, calloused the same way it used to be when he came home from weekend carpentry projects. Helen's breath trembled. She turned the page again. A single ultrasound photo was tucked into the back sleeve. 12 weeks. A tiny bean with a fluttering heartbeat. Nathan went very still. Helen hadn't meant to show him yet. Her fingers shook as she tried to close the album, but he stopped her with a gentle hand on her wrist. Helen, we lost her, she whispered. 3 months after the accident. I didn't even get to tell you I was pregnant before. Her voice shattered. The album slid from her lap. Nathan pulled it onto his own knees, staring at the grainy image like it might disappear. Rain hammered the windows now, loud and relentless. I had a child, he said, barely audible. We had a child. And I wasn't there. Helen pressed her knuckles to her mouth to hold in the sob. He looked up. Tears tracked silently down his face, but his eyes were steady on hers. Pleading, breaking, begging. Show me more, he said, voice ragged. Show me everything I forgot. I need to remember you, even if it destroys me. The hallway smelled of fresh paint and old grief when Nathan carried his single duffel into the guest room that night. Helen hovered in the doorway, arms folded tight across her ribs, afraid to step over the threshold. He set the bag on the quilt she had bought the week before the accident. Soft gray, tiny white stars, and the mattress sighed like it recognized him. I can take the couch, he said, not looking at her. No, the word came out sharper than she meant. She softened it. This is your house. He gave a small, broken laugh. Feels like a museum of a man I murdered. Silence stretched, thick and aching. Rain tapped the window like impatient fingers. Helen left him alone long enough to change into one of his old t-shirts. Threadbare, the university logo cracked, and a pair of his sweatpants she had slept in for months because they still carried the ghost of his scent. When she came back, he was standing in front of the dresser mirror, staring at his own reflection like it belonged to a stranger. She leaned against the doorframe. You always stood like that after a shower. One hip cocked, towel too low, pretending you didn't know I was watching. His eyes met hers in the glass. Something flickered there, heat, memory, confusion. He turned. I made coffee the way you said I liked it, he offered, voice low. 2 sugars, splash of oat milk. Tasted right, but I don't remember ever buying oat milk. Helen's heart stuttered. She crossed the room slowly, drawn by the same invisible thread that had yanked him to the lake. When she reached him, she didn't stop until her bare feet touched his boots, close enough to feel the warmth coming off his skin. You started drinking it when I got pregnant, she whispered. You said if I couldn't have caffeine, you wouldn't either. Solidarity. His throat bobbed. He lifted a hand, hesitated, then let his knuckles graze the sleeve of the shirt she wore. His shirt. The cotton was soft from 1,000 washes, and his fingers trembled. You kept my clothes. I kept everything. A muscle jumped in his jaw. He looked past her to the bed, then back. "Show me something else." So she did. She taught him how he used to steal the blankets and then wrap them both like a burrito when she complained. How he hummed Springsteen off-key in the shower every morning at 6:47. How he kissed the inside of her wrist when he thought she was asleep, right over the faint blue vein, like he was checking her pulse to be sure she was real. Each lesson was a small resurrection and a fresh burial at once. On the third night, he found her in the kitchen at 2 a.m., staring at the kettle that wouldn't boil fast enough. She hadn't heard him come in. When his arms slid around her from behind, slow, asking permission, she froze. Then her body melted backward into his chest before her mind could protest. He rested his chin on her head, breathing her in. "I woke up reaching for you," he murmured against her hair. The bed was cold and I panicked, like I'd lost something I couldn't name. Helen's hands came up to cover his forearms, holding him there. His heartbeat thumped steady against her spine. Strong, alive, here. "I'm right here," she said, voice cracking. His lips brushed the shell of her ear, accidental or not. "I know. That's what scares me." They stood like that until the kettle screamed. Later, when she passed the guest room on her way to bed, the door was cracked open. Light spilled into the hall. Nathan sat on the edge of the mattress in nothing but low-slung sweats, head in his hands. He looked up when her shadow crossed the doorway. "I dreamed about you," he said hoarsely. "We were dancing in this kitchen. You were laughing because I kept stepping on your toes. And I was so damn happy it hurt." His fingers dug into his thighs. "I woke up crying. I don't even know the song." Helen's breath left her in a rush. She stepped inside, knelt in front of him, and gently pried his hands open. His palms were damp with tears. "It was wildflowers," she whispered. "Tom Petty. Our first dance." He stared at her like she was the only fixed point in a spinning world. Slowly, carefully, he lifted one shaking hand and cupped her cheek. His thumb traced the path a tear had left. "I don't remember the song," he said, voice raw, "but I remember the feeling. And it's killing me that I can't give it back to you whole." Helen turned her face into his palm and pressed a kiss to the center of it. Open, reverent. His sharp inhale sounded like pain. Outside, thunder rolled low and distant. Inside, the space between them shrank to nothing and everything at once. The kiss never landed. Helen's lips had barely brushed the lifeline of his palm when Nathan's phone buzzed on the nightstand, shrill and foreign in the hush. He flinched like the sound had struck him. The spell cracked. He pulled his hand back as though her mouth had burned him. "Sorry," he muttered, reaching for the phone with shaking fingers. Unknown number. He silenced it, but the screen lit again immediately. Same number. Helen watched the color drain from his face. "Answer it," she said quietly. He did, pressing the phone to his ear. "Yeah." A pause. His spine straightened. "No, I told you I needed more time." Another pause, longer. The voice on the other end was low, male, urgent. Nathan's jaw tightened. "I said I'm handling it." He ended the call and stared at the screen until it went dark. Who was that? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he pushed up the sleeve of his t-shirt, exposing his left forearm. A thin, deliberate scar ran from the crook of his elbow to his wrist, pale, surgical, nothing like the random nicks she remembered from weekend projects. "This showed up after the coma," he said, voice hollow. "They told me it was from 4 lines. But it doesn't look like any 4 scar I've seen." Helen's stomach turned cold. She reached out, fingertips hovering over the mark without touching. "You never had that before." "I know." He swallowed. "I went back to the hospital in Portland last week. Asked for my records. They said there was no patient named Nathan Keller admitted last year. No coma. No car accident. Nothing." The room tilted. Helen sat back on her heels, the floor suddenly too close. "That's impossible. I thought maybe paperwork error." He gave a brittle laugh. So I called Mark, their oldest friend, the one who'd identified the body, or what was left of it after the fire. He wouldn't take my call. Texted back, "You're supposed to be dead. Stop this." Helen's pulse roared in her ears. She stood too fast, swaying. Nathan caught her waist to steady her, hands on her hips exactly where they used to rest when they danced in the same hallway. The familiarity of it made her want to scream. "Someone burned a body and said it was you," she whispered. "Someone made sure I buried an empty story." Nathan's grip tightened, then loosened, like he was afraid he'd leave bruises. His eyes searched hers, wild now. "There's more. In the duffel, there's a second phone. Burner. It only has one contact saved. Handler." He stepped past her into the hall, returned with the small black phone, and held it out like it might explode. The screen showed 17 missed calls, all from the same number that had just rung. Helen took it. Her thumb trembled over the callback button. "Don't," he said quickly, then softer. "I don't know what happens if we answer." Thunder cracked overhead, shaking the windows. The storm that had been circling finally broke. Rain lashed the house in sheets. Nathan's gaze dropped to the scar again, then lifted to her face. "I'm starting to think the man who died wasn't an accident. And the man who woke up," his voice fractured, "maybe he wasn't supposed to come home." Helen's fingers closed around his wrist, right over the lie carved into his skin. "Then we find out who wanted you gone," she said, fierce and trembling all at once. "And we make them wish they'd finished the job." Outside, a car door slammed in the street. Headlights swept across the curtains, slow, deliberate, then cut to black. They both heard it. Nathan pulled her gently but urgently away from the window. His heart hammered against her shoulder where she now stood tucked beneath his arm. The burner phone buzzed again in her hand. This time she pressed accept and lifted it to her ear. A man's voice, calm and iced over, filled the silence. "Tell Mr. Keller his time is up. Bring the drive tonight or the widow joins him in the ground, for real this time." The line went dead. Helen looked up. Nathan's face had gone white as bone, but his arms tightened around her like he'd fight the storm itself to keep her breathing. They weren't alone anymore, and whatever had taken him once was coming back to finish it. The lights died with a soft pop, as though the house itself exhaled and gave up. Rain hammered the roof like fists. Wind rattled the old windows until the frames groaned. Helen's phone flashlight cut a thin white path down the hallway, but the cold had already seeped in. The air felt suddenly thinner. Nathan stood at the foot of the stairs holding a candle he'd found in the kitchen drawer, flame trembling between his cupped hands. Shadows danced across the scar on his forearm and over the new, harder lines of his face. "Generator's dead," he said. "Fuse box is flooded." Helen's breath fogged in the sudden chill. She hugged herself, still clutching the burner phone that hadn't rung again, yet somehow felt heavier than before. Their eyes met across the flickering dark. "I'm not sleeping alone tonight," she whispered. The confession slipped out before fear could stop it. "Not with someone out there who wants us both gone." Nathan's jaw flexed. He took one step up, then another, until the candle brought his face close enough that she could see the storm in his eyes. "My room's colder than this hallway," he said, voice rough. "But the bed's big enough." No more words were needed. She followed him. The master bedroom smelled faintly of cedar and them, of every night they had ever shared and every night she had cried alone. Moonless dark pressed against the windows. The candle threw gold over the quilt, over the two pillows still indented from a life that had paused mid-breath. Nathan set the candle on the dresser. The flame shrank, then steadied. He turned to her, hands open at his sides, waiting. Helen's fingers shook as she pulled his old university hoodie over her head and let it drop. Beneath it she wore only the thin camisole she slept in. The air kissed her skin and raised goosebumps, or maybe it was the way he looked at her. like she was both a stranger and the only safe place he had ever known. She stepped forward until her bare feet touched his. Slowly she lifted his hand and pressed it flat against her racing heart. "Feel that?" she breathed. "That's yours. It never stopped being yours." His palm burned through the silk. A shudder ran through him. His eyes fluttered shut. When they opened again, the gray had gone almost black. "I don't know the words for worse part," he said, voice cracking. "But I know the for better. I feel it every time you're close." He bent his head until their foreheads touched. Their breath mingled, warm and uneven. Helen's hands slid up his chest, tracing the shape of a body she had memorized and mourned, now alive and trembling under her touch. Nathan's arms came around her carefully, as though she might dissolve. Then tighter, like he was anchoring himself to the earth. She felt the moment he let go of caution. His mouth found the corner of hers, not quite a kiss, just the soft drag of lips asking permission. She answered by tilting her face up. The kiss was slow, aching, tasting of salt and storm and everything unsaid. It wasn't memory. It was recognition. His hands cradled her jaw, thumbs stroking the tears she hadn't realized were falling. She pressed closer, needing to feel his heartbeat against heartbeat. Clothes slipped away like unnecessary armor. Candlelight painted gold across shoulders and collarbones, across the scar on his arm and the faint silver stretch marks low on her belly, remnants of the child they'd lost. Every new discovery drew a shaky inhale, a reverent brush of lips, a whispered sorry and please and stay. They sank onto the bed still half-tangled, the quilt cool beneath them, his warmth above. There was no rush, only the quiet urgency of two people learning how to breathe the same air again. His mouth traced the line of her throat. Her fingers threaded through his hair exactly the way they always had, as if muscle and bone had kept better archives than his mind. When he paused, forehead against hers, breathing ragged, she felt him tremble with the effort of holding back. "I'm scared I'll hurt you," he whispered. "You already did," she answered, soft and steady. "By leaving. Stay now. Love me now. That's how you fix it." He made a low sound, half sob, half prayer, and kissed her again, deeper, letting the last wall crumble. Skin to skin, heart to breaking heart, they moved together with the unhurried reverence of people reclaiming holy ground. Every touch was apology and promise. Every shared breath stitched them back together thread by invisible thread. When the candle guttered low and the storm outside reached its peak, they reached theirs quietly, clinging, tears mixing on cheeks and pillows, names spoken like lifelines. After, he tucked her against his chest, legs entwined, palms splayed over the small of her back exactly where it used to rest. The rain softened to a hush. Helen felt his lips brush her temple. "I still don't remember our wedding," he murmured into the dark, voice raw and wondering. "But I remember this. I remember you." Her fingers tightened on his. "That's enough for tonight." Thunder rolled far away, retreating. In the dying candlelight, two heartbeats found the same old rhythm and refused to let go. Dawn crept in pale and watery, the storm spent. Helen woke first, cheek against Nathan's chest, the steady thud of his heart the only clock she needed. His arm was locked around her waist, fingers splayed over the small scar low on her belly, as if even in sleep he was guarding the place their child had been. She didn't move. She just listened, afraid the moment would fracture if she breathed wrong. Nathan stirred. His lips brushed her hair, an unconscious greeting. When his eyes opened, they were soft, unguarded, the gray of winter sky after snow. Then memory returned. She saw it settle over him like a bruise. The phone call, the threat, the drive they still hadn't found. He pressed his forehead to hers. "I was hoping it was a nightmare," he whispered. "Only the parts where you were gone." His laugh cracked. He started to pull away, but she tightened her arms. "Not yet." They stayed tangled a little longer, stealing warmth, stealing time. Then the burner phone vibrated on the nightstand, rattling like a trapped wasp. Nathan reached for it first. The screen showed a single text, coordinates, and one line. Sunrise. Come alone or she bleeds. Helen's stomach lurched. She sat up, sheet clutched to her chest. We're not playing their game. We don't have a choice. His voice was raw but steady. They think I still have whatever I was carrying. She watched him dress in the half-light, pulling on yesterday's jeans, the same hoodie she'd slept in months ago. Every movement was deliberate, soldier-precise. She realized she was seeing the man who had survived whatever took him from her. He knelt in front of her, hands on her bare knees. There's a safe behind the winter coats, he said quietly. Combination is the day we lost the baby. Inside is a flash drive I don't remember hiding. If I don't come back, you will. She gripped his wrists. We do this together. Nathan searched her face, then nodded once. 20 minutes later they stood in the closet, coats pushed aside. The safe door swung open on silent hinges. Inside, a single black drive and a folded note in handwriting she knew better than her own. If you're reading this, they got too close. Everything on the drive proves the board was laundering cartel money through the new acquisition. I was going to the FBI the night of the accident. They staged the crash, pulled me out, dosed me with scopolamine and God knows what else to wipe me. They kept me alive as leverage. They told me you'd die if I ever tried to come home. I'm sorry I believed them. I love you more than memory. And Helen's knees buckled. Nathan caught her, arms iron bands around her shaking body. They used me to keep you buried, she choked out. All this time they let me grieve so you'd stay gone. His jaw clenched so hard she heard it. And I let them. He cupped her face, thumbs wiping tears she couldn't stop. But I'm here now, and I'm done hiding. He slipped the drive into his pocket, then pulled her close again, mouth against her temple. I didn't remember our life, he whispered. But my body walked through fire to get back to you. That has to count for something. The morning light strengthened, cold and merciless. Nathan kissed her once, hard, like a vow. We end this today. He started for the door. Helen grabbed his hand, lacing their fingers exactly the way they had the day they got married. Together, she said. Headlights swept across the front windows again, closer this time, deliberate. Nathan squeezed her hand, eyes fierce and suddenly unafraid. Then let's go give them back the man they tried to kill. The gravel crunched under their boots as they stepped outside together, fingers still locked so tightly the bones ached. Two black SUVs idled at the curb, engines purring like predators. For men in dark windbreakers waited, hands near holsters they didn't bother to hide. Nathan pushed Helen half a step behind him, shielding her with his body the way he used to when they crossed busy streets. Old reflex, new stakes. The tallest man lifted his chin. Drive. Now. Both of you get in, nobody dies. Nathan's voice came out calm, almost gentle. You're not touching her. Helen felt the shift in him, something steel-cool sliding into place. He pulled the flash drive from his pocket and held it up between two fingers. This is what you want. She walks away, you get it. That's the only deal. The man smiled without warmth. You're not in a position to negotiate, Keller. Helen's heart slammed against her ribs. She stepped forward, shoulder brushing Nathan's arm. Then shoot me first, she said, voice shaking but clear. Because I'm not letting him disappear again. A beat of silence. Wind whipped dead leaves between them. Nathan turned his head, just enough to meet her eyes. In that sliver of a second, the guns, the men, the morning cold. All of it fell away. There was only the way he looked at her. Stripped raw, fiercely tender, like she was the first and last thing he wanted to see on this earth. He brought their joined hands to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. Quick, reverent. I remember this part, he murmured, so low only she could hear. The part where I'd burn the world down before I let anyone hurt you. Then louder, to the men. You want the drive? Fine. He tossed it underhand. It arced through the air and landed in the grass 10 feet away. Every weapon swung toward the tiny black stick. Nathan moved. He yanked Helen down behind the porch steps in the same heartbeat that sirens exploded from both ends of the street. Red and blue lights flooded the dawn. Tires screamed. Doors flew open. Federal agents. Drop your weapons. Chaos. Nathan covered her body with his mouth at her ear. FBI's been watching the house since yesterday. I emailed the files last night while you were asleep. Copies to every major paper, too. They're done. Helen's sob was half laugh, half terror. She clung to his jacket as agents swarmed past them, shouting commands. The men in windbreakers were face down on the wet lawn in seconds, cuffs snapping. When the street finally quieted, Nathan pulled her up, hands framing her face, thumbs stroking away tears and rain. They're gone, he said, voice rough with wonder. It's over. She stared at him, chest heaving. Do you remember now? Any of it? He searched her eyes for a long moment. Slowly, regretfully, he shook his head. I don't remember the day we met, or our first kiss, or the sound you made when you walked down the aisle. His voice cracked. I'm sorry. Helen's breath shuddered out of her. She waited for the pain to swallow her whole. Instead, he dropped to his knees right there on the wet porch boards, heedless of the agents milling around them, and took both her hands in his. But I remember the way my heart stops when you walk into a room, he said fiercely. I remember how safe I feel when you breathe against my neck. I remember choosing you every second since the lake, and I will keep choosing you every second I have left. He pressed her palms over his heart. I don't need yesterday to love you today. I'm falling again, Helen. Harder. And this time I'm wide awake for it. Tears blurred him into watercolor. She sank down in front of him, forehead to forehead. Say it, she whispered. He didn't hesitate. Marry me, again. For the first time. For the only time that matters. Behind them an agent cleared his throat awkwardly and retreated. Helen laughed through the tears, the sound bright and broken and free. She cupped his face, thumbs tracing the scar and stubble and everything she thought she'd lost. Yes, she said. 1,000 times yes. Nathan kissed her like a man who had crossed death itself to get back to this moment, slow, deliberate, certain. When they finally pulled apart, the sun had broken through the clouds, spilling gold across the porch, across their joined hands, across the ring she still wore that suddenly felt brand new. He rested his brow against hers, voice soft and steady. Take me home, Mrs. Keller, he whispered. Teach me the rest. And Helen, smiling through the tears that would never again be only grief, led him inside. The porch door had barely clicked shut behind them when the power snapped off again, this time with no storm to blame. Darkness swallowed the house. Helen's hand tightened in Nathan's. Generator's still dead, she whispered. No, he answered, voice low. That wasn't the generator. A soft metallic click came from the back hallway, the unmistakable slide of a shotgun being racked. Nathan shoved her behind him so fast her shoulder hit the wall. He pressed her there with his body, palm flat between her breasts, feeling her heart slam against his hand. Stay, he breathed against her ear. Then he stepped into the living room, unarmed, unafraid. A single red dot appeared on his chest. From the shadows near the kitchen island, a man spoke, voice familiar and venomous. You always did stand in front of her like a shield, Keller. Annoying habit. Victor Lang, Nathan's old CFO. The man who had signed the papers that sent millions through shell companies and straight into cartel pockets. The man who had ordered the crash, the drugs, the grave. Victor stepped into the faint streetlight leaking through the blinds. Shotgun steady. Walked right into my retirement party. Helen's pulse roared in her ears. She edged sideways, fingers searching the console table for anything. Keys, the heavy glass vase, the letter opener. Nathan didn't move. The red dot danced over his heart, throat, heart again. "You came alone," Nathan said. "Not a question. Cleanup crews work better solo." Victor smiled thinly. "You were supposed to stay gone. The amnesia was a gift. But you couldn't leave well enough alone." Helen's fingers closed around the vase. She lifted it slowly. Victor swung the barrel toward her voice. "Don't, sweetheart. I only need one of you breathing to make sure the other behaves." Nathan's shoulders squared. Something shifted in his stance, subtle but absolute. And then it happened. A flash, bright and blinding behind his eyes. The lake, moonlight on black water. Helen on the dock in that pale blue sundress, laughing because he was nervous and fumbling with the ring box. The way she gasped when he finally got to one knee. The way she launched herself at him so hard they almost fell into the water. The way she whispered yes, yes, yes against his name like a prayer while he slid the ring on her finger and the world narrowed to just them. The memory hit so hard his knees nearly buckled. He staggered half a step. Victor mistook it for fear and laughed. Nathan lifted his head. "I remember the lake," he said, voice quiet, deadly calm. "I remember promising her forever on that dock. And I remember what you took from us." Victor's smirk faltered. Nathan moved faster than Helen had ever seen him. He lunged sideways, shoulder slamming the coffee table into Victor's legs. The shotgun roared, deafening, plaster exploding from the ceiling. Helen screamed and hurled the vase. It shattered against Victor's temple. He staggered. Nathan was on him. They crashed into the kitchen island, plates crashing, glass splintering. Nathan's fists found flesh, bone, rage. Victor tried to bring the barrel up. Nathan wrenched it sideways and the second blast took out the overhead light in a shower of sparks. Helen scrambled for the fallen shotgun, hands shaking too hard to grip. Then silence. Nathan stood over Victor's crumpled body, chest heaving, knuckles bleeding. The shotgun lay 3 feet away. Victor wasn't moving. Nathan turned to her. Moonlight through the broken blind stripes painted silver across his face. Tears tracked clean lines through the blood and plaster dust. "I remember," he rasped. "The lake, the ring, the way you looked at me like I was your whole world." He took one trembling step, then another until he reached her. His hands rose slowly, cradling her face like she was made of glass. "I remember loving you so hard it scared me, and I remember it still does." Helen's sob broke free. She threw her arms around his neck, fingers digging into his hair, legs giving out. He caught her, lifted her, pressed her back against the nearest wall so she wouldn't fall. Outside, sirens finally wailed, closer now, too late and right on time. Nathan buried his face in her neck, breathing her in like oxygen after drowning. "I'm sorry it took dying to come back," he whispered against her skin. "But I'm here, never leaving again." She pulled back just far enough to kiss him, hard, desperate, tasting copper and salt in him. "Then don't," she said against his mouth. "Stay and remember the rest with me, one day at a time." Red and blue lights flooded the windows. Doors slammed. Boots pounded up the porch. Nathan didn't let go. He held her tighter, heartbeat to heartbeat, while the past bled out on their kitchen floor and the future, fragile, fierce, theirs, began again in the dark. 6 months later the lake lay smooth as polished glass, sunset bleeding rose and copper across the water. The same dock, rebuilt after winter ice took half of it, creaked softly under their weight. No guests this time, just them, the hush of evening, and the quiet certainty that nothing would ever separate them again. Helen wore the same pale blue sundress she had worn the night he proposed, hem fluttering around her knees, sleeves slipping off her shoulders in the warm wind. Nathan wore the linen shirt she had bought him the week before the accident. Sleeves rolled. Wedding band glinting on his finger like it had never left. They stood barefoot at the end of the dock, toes curled over weathered planks, hands already linked. Nathan's thumb traced the inside of her wrist, right over the vein that had always jumped when he touched her. "I practiced 100 speeches," he said, voice low, a little rough. "None of them were good enough." Helen smiled, eyes shining. "Then don't give me a speech. Give me you." He exhaled, shaky, and brought her hands to his chest, pressing her palms flat so she could feel the unsteady thunder beneath bone and muscle. "I still don't remember everything," he began. "Some days whole years are just gone. I may never get them back." His fingers tightened around hers. "But I remember the first time you laughed after I came home, how it sounded like sunrise. I remember the way you say my name when you're half asleep. I remember choosing you on a porch while men pointed guns at us. I remember choosing you every morning since." A tear slipped down her cheek. He caught it with his thumb, then leaned in and kissed the wet trail it left. "I don't need the old memories to be whole," he whispered against her skin. "Because loving you now, this version of you, this version of me, is the clearest thing I've ever known." Helen's breath hitched. She rose on her toes, forehead to his. "I carried you in my bones when you were ash on a shelf," she said, voice trembling but fierce. "I will carry you in my heart now that you're breathing. Past, present, blank spaces, all of it. I choose you too, again, for the first time, for the only time that matters." Nathan reached into his pocket and drew out the original ring, the one she had almost dropped into the lake the day he returned. He had cleaned it, polished it, but the inscription inside was still worn soft from years against her skin. He slid it slowly onto her finger, over the faint white line the new band had left, until both rings sat together, old love and new love fused. "With everything I was," he said, "and everything I am and everything I will become, I marry you, Helen." She lifted his left hand and kissed the place where his ring had been missing for so long, then slipped it back where it belonged. "With every yesterday I mourned, every today I fought for, and every tomorrow I will choose, I marry you, Nathan." The sun touched the horizon, spilling liquid gold across the water. They kissed, slow, deliberate, a vow sealed with salt and breath and the softest sigh of wind through pines. When they pulled apart, forehead still touching, Nathan smiled, small, crooked, perfect. "Take me home, Mrs. Keller." Helen laced their fingers and turned toward the shore. Behind them the lake glowed like it had the first time he asked, and the last time, and every time in between that his heart had quietly kept for them. They walked off the dock hand in hand, barefoot, laughing under their breath because the planks were warm and the future was wide open. Some memories never returned, but love, against every odd, remembered them both.